When news occurs in certain areas of Jerusalem, it is often labeled as East Jerusalem, which was conquered by Israel in 1967, and Palestinians see as the capital of their future state. When this is said, they are leaving out critical, important context that the public needs to know.
First ask, how much of the context of any story does the reporter himself or herself know? It's not just the readers. Many reporters are ignorant of the topics they're writing about, or initially ignorant, okay? I've seen reporters come to Israel, reporters who live in Israel, who moved, who made Aliyah to Israel, and then members of the foreign press who didn't make Aliyah, but they're stationed here. When they first arrived, they don't know Hebrew. Many of them don't know anything about the history. It would be comparable to somebody suddenly plopping me down in China and telling me to cover stories that are happening. So first of all, many reporters themselves don't know the background. But the ones who do, yes, have an obligation to provide context. But that's also tricky, because in a short news story, how much historical context can you give without adding another 5,000 words to a story that should be 200 words? It's impossible. So what you have to do, there are conventions. There are conventions that enable you to provide a taste of the context, because you can't do it in every single story.
It's very difficult to expect reporters to write 2 or 3 lines of context. However, it is important for a reporter if they were to say, Israel came into eastern Jerusalem in 1967 following attack by 5 Arab armies. They will not do that. They will say Israel conquered eastern Jerusalem in 1967 together with the West Bank, but they won't report a line of context that it was Israel that was defending itself against an Arab onslaught. It was being attacked and bombed by the Jordanians. And they will say, well, this is not a history report. Well, this is not a column or an op-ed. But in a foreign policy and foreign affairs story, it is incumbent upon them to add one line of context. And that line of context frequently reflects their own opinion, their own take on the on the matter, on the reporting matter itself. Now, it is a matter of fact that Israel was defending itself. The United Nations said in 1967, through UN Security Council Resolution 242, that that Israel was the defender in that war. So it really is incumbent upon foreign reporters to write one line, 6 words, that Israel conquered the eastern side of Jerusalem and the former Jordanian-held West Bank in a war of self-defense. In a war of self-defense. 5 words could add a whole lot of context to a reporter's report, and I've never seen it.
Context is absolutely important, and the wrong context, or painting the picture in the wrong context, gives the reader a very biased view of the situation. I think news agencies such as Reuters and AP and AFP use that kind of line to give the reader some kind of background about the Israeli conflict, if you like, Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think it's very misleading. I think to formulaically report every incident with that contextual sentence doesn't do the trick. I think in each case you have to provide context that's relevant to whatever you're reporting on. So if in a terrorist attack, if we take a terrorist attack as an example, to describe a terrorist attack in Jerusalem and then put a background sentence about how Jerusalem is a point of contention between Israel and the Palestinians, and East Jerusalem, or Jerusalem itself, hasn't been recognized by the international community as Israel's capital. That already biases the reader by telling him or her that we kind of endorse terrorism, and I think that's just unacceptable.
It's up to a media outlet to give people the basic facts that they need in order to understand any piece of news on any given day. With Israel, it's much harder, because you can't explain 3,000 years of history in a soundbite or a tweet. But it has to be done in a fair and objective way in order to get out the story properly. And there are too many media outlets that say things that are false in order to save time, or because they're limited in the amount of information that they can give in any given report. And that very often works against Israel. It is a big journalistic error if they're giving only the Palestinian narrative when it comes to background. If they don't give the Israeli narrative, the narrative of the people in charge of the government that controls this land, then they are doing a disservice to their viewers and their readers.
It would really behoove the foreign media in the Middle East to begin to look into the Palestinian political culture. Why is it that the Palestinian Authority is inciting to terrorism around the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is sitting on Judaism's holiest site, the Temple Mount? You don't get that type of reportage, the type of context which you've asked about, and it creates a constantly misleading impression that Israel is a conqueror of lands that don't belong to it, that Israel is a colonizer of someone else's state. Now, this doesn't come out of a vacuum. It comes out of a constant diet, in my assessment, of lack of reporting context, of personal beliefs being presented as objective fact. And I think that that foreign journalists would do very well. And I'm sorry to generalize, but in fact, it is the case most of the time. Not with all foreign journalists. There have been some excellent foreign journalists out there, but the risk is there all the time because of the complexities of the Middle East situation, and particularly the Palestinian-Israeli ongoing conflict, that they end up lacking in the type of balance and context that is so sorely needed when reporting on this particular issue.
Journalists have a responsibility to give the full context of any story or subject that they're covering. By context, we mean giving the end news consumer, you and I, the opportunity to fully conclude and understand the breadth of information relevant to the story. To describe how Israel conquered Jerusalem in 1967 without further context is to omit very important information to give you and I the chance to make a reasonable, factual, and accurate conclusion. This is an example of lack of context, and it's an important form of media bias that we're on the lookout for. All the more important for those that really care about Middle East coverage and accuracy in reporting is to recognize the many ways in which bias can occur. That's why we've created Red Lines, Honest Reporting's Guide to Media Bias. Read it today, get empowered, and get involved.